So welcome everyone. This is the beginning of our new lecture series for the semester. And so my name, for those of you that don't know, is Richard Weller. I'm chair of the department here in the Weitzman School, and it's my great pleasure tonight to serve as the MC for this evening's presentation. The theme of the series that we're running this semester is interdisciplinarity. And our first speaker is Diana Agrest from the Cooper Union in New York City. Now with me, I'll introduce Diana in a moment, but before I do, we always have a great team of student facilitators who I would like to thank. With me tonight in facilitation roles are Lesha Mokriki and Nicole Cheng. They will handle the chat room and the related Q&A at the close of the lecture. Also, before the Q&A, I've asked Keith Vandersis to join us. Keith is a senior lecturer and our media guru here at Penn. And Keith will briefly engage Diana in a conversation about media and representation based on her latest her book. Before I introduce Diana, though, I would like to acknowledge and thank the Abend family. It's the Abend family that have made tonight possible, in fact. Tonight is the inaugural Abend Family Endowed Lecture. This fund was established in June 2020 for the purpose of providing financial support for an annual public lecture in either the architecture department or the landscape architecture department. And it's our good luck that the first one is in the landscape architecture department. Steve Abend and his daughter, Linda Abend Freshman, are both here with us tonight. Welcome, Steve, and welcome, Linda. Thank you very much. A big thank you from all of us here in the school. We really appreciate it. Steve graduated from our school, in fact, in 1965 with a master's in architecture, and Linda graduated from Penn in 2007 with a majors in political science and Latin American studies, and she is now an attorney in Boston. Steve is currently an architect in Kansas City, Missouri, and I note that he has a personal interest in making Zen gardens. And if any of you have been to Japan and know what that means, it's quite serious, and there are rules and there are details that are just mind-boggling. So now to our speaker. Diana is a tenured professor of architecture at the Irwin S. Chanin School of Architecture at the good old Cooper Union. She's been there since 1977, and it was John Hayduck, who was the dean at the time, that offered her the original gig. And for those of you that remember John Hayduck, or that name means anything to you, I mean, it's pretty much all you really need to put on your CV. Hayduck was a legendary figure. Maybe that's a name that's a little bit lost on the current generation, but it's one that is well worth looking up. I remember a big competition in 1991 for the Potsdamer Platz in Berlin, and all the designers were, jostling, give it to me, and doing all sorts of fancy drawings, trying to show how they could urban design the hell out of it. And Hayduck entered the competition with just one small drawing of one little modest house called the Printer's House. And it was a beautiful testament to another way of approaching work. Anyway, I digress. Unknown to most landscape architects, Diana's early theoretical work anticipated and laid the groundwork for landscape urbanism, what would later become known as landscape urbanism. She's also pioneered the use of film in architectural theory. Diana has 7 books on architecture, urbanism, and design theory to her name, and it was the most recent of these books, titled Architecture of Nature and Nature of Architecture, published by our good friends at Oro, and it was this book that really caught my attention. And it's this work in this book that Diana will speak largely about this evening. This book really has some of the most beautiful digital renderings that I've seen in a long time. I mean, they are extraordinarily beautiful drawings. But not only are they beautiful, it's what they show and how they show it. Now, Diana will argue that they represent nature. I've put it to her that they represent a contemporary form of landscape, and she insists on the word nature, which is fine. But they certainly move beyond any sort of pictorial scene of nature or landscape and start to plumb the depths of what I think we mean by the Earth system. So her subjects are phenomena such as glaciers, volcanoes, permafrost, geological strata, and clouds. In these works, she's confronting a scale of space and time that expands and transcends the established boundaries of the architectural and, for that matter, the landscape architectural discipline. And they bring us closer, I think, to that hyperobject that we are now referring to as the Earth system. And that's a really important representational move, I think. So please welcome Diana Agrest and join me in thanking the Abend family for making tonight's lecture possible. So thank you to everyone. And now, Diane, it's over to you.
Thank you so much, Richard. And thank you, Fritz, as a dean. And thank you, the Abend family, for their support of these lectures. And I'm really extremely pleased to be, I think, the inaugural speaker of that endowed lecture. So that makes it doubly significant to me. And maybe you made such a good introduction, Richard, maybe I don't have to say much about what I'm going to talk about. But so I want to give you a little, very brief synopsis of what my lecture is going to be. So first, I'm going to talk about the concepts and the ideas and beliefs that made me, for some reason, get involved in this work that I've been doing. I started way back with nature. Some people believe it was a new thing, but I've been working since 1989 and exactly before landscape urbanism and all that. And you're going to see how. It's not good or bad, it just is. And, but then one day I decided to go about this just nature as such. And people ask me what led you to do that? And frankly, there may be many reasons. One is that I was interested in nature. Maybe it was the state of nature. Maybe it was what passed for sustainability, which wasn't totally sustainability, or related to a market economy rather than to the earth itself, maybe. I don't know, or maybe all of it. Who knows? But the fact is, I did that for, solid every year for about 8 years. And the work I'm going to show here is probably about 20% of the work that have been produced in my studios over that year, mostly in the graduate program, which is it's a research studio. And we can talk later about that, but they had nothing to hold on to. So that was a good thing about the studio, nothing to hold on to. And then they flew with it, and you'll see how. So the term nature, I have to share a screen. That's the first thing I need to do. The term nature is used in this work as equivalent to Earth as a living organism, confronting its materiality and the force at work in it, and examining conditions that existed in periods dating back millions or billions of years. This work is about the Earth striated by lines of all kinds in sectional accumulations of so many now invisible plans. Earth has changed and transformed drastically over its 4.5 billion years, and life on Earth has existed and evolved for almost as long. The forces of nature have extraordinary power, and the constant transformation of materials and formations continues and is of a degree that we cannot always control or fully predict, despite all our scientific and technological advances. In the geological time of Earth, oceans have appeared and disappeared, great plains have been eroded, continents have moved and keep moving in the continuous dynamics of Earth's plates. But if we link geological time to historical human time, we can't fail to notice the catastrophic transformations through which constant ruthless exploitation have been taking place for millennia in the process of our expansion, reproduction, and survival that has continued, amplified, and accelerated until the present manifest in the destruction of the natural earth environment that takes place every second. Rethinking the question of nature here from our own perspective is a matter of finding the right questions rather than looking for immediate answers. It is about thinking and rethinking inherent ideologies and assumed truths through a creative use of architectural representational means as a tool for thought in the production of architectural knowledge. It is in fact, and these are some more images of the earth at large, tectonic plates, and this is some of the projects, sand dunes. It is in fact through the city that I discovered nature. This discovery took me from in 1989 project for Visionary San Francisco at San Francisco MoMA. It was an exhibition of that title. And my reaction to the title of the show as a visionary, was a move to eliminate buildings at a time when a bunch of buildings was a prevailing surrogate for a city. As if by later demand, nature reappeared after having been absent from urban discourse at that time for almost 50 years. This project was in a way a provocation, as I realized very soon it was not actual nature, and thus emphasized the conflictive history and present conflict between city and nature, and it became what I call the machine in the garden. This project led me to investigate the question of nature from historical, philosophical, scientific, and gender perspectives, and I call this project, the project itself, the machine in the garden, or as I call the essay I wrote after, the return of the repressed nature. It was a realization of the essential place of nature in American culture and history, from the philosophical underpinnings of the country's founding text to nature's manifestation in the colossal magnitude of the American landscape, from the country's natural richness and beauty to religious beliefs articulated through the aesthetic philosophy of the sublime and reified in painting, led me to pursue this exploration. There has always been an active relationship between nature and architecture, but its interaction takes a prominent position at the present moment of climate change and environmental crisis. Nature as an object of study in its many complex modes of interaction with architecture, scientific, philosophy, economic, political, and mostly ideological, is directly, implicitly, and critically re-examined in this work. Nature has played a key role in the history and theory of Western architecture as an essential referent, appearing as a constant motif in architectural texts from its very beginnings, in Vitruvius, and then Alberti imbues architecture with divine attributes through a set of complex representational operations whereby nature is a shifter between God and architecture, where proportion is a shifter between nature and man, and finally, where man's body is a shifter articulates nature and architecture. In the 17th century, with Newton, Leibniz, and the concept of infinitesimal calculus, science as a discipline explains nature in terms that are reified in architectural discourse through new concepts such as infinite and continuous space and the erosion of physical boundaries, as well as the Baroque period's expansion of perspectival views and thus the horizon itself. But I'm not going to expand on that or show pictures. In the modernist architecture theories of the early 20th century, such as Le Corbusier's Radiant City of 29, urbanism acquires a new prominence and nature comes to occupy an important complex position as both a concrete pragmatic consideration and a metonymic construct, architecturalized, flattened in space, and synchronic in time. Nature is taken over and repressed, same by urban discourse, and represented by a controlled geometric neutral plane, a neutral green, not only in Radiant City, but also in many post-World War II and subsequent urban developments for most of the 20th century. Just as urbanism became planning, nature in the 1960s between the environment via systems theory. The environment did not just include natural conditions and resources, but social and anthropological dimensions as integral parts of the urban realm. These approaches were not about architecture being consonant with the natural environment, air, light, sand, health as in Radiant City, but about that environment itself conceived as a system. The relationship between nature and architecture has been bound by the relation between nature culture to that between nature architecture and nature city. In order to penetrate into the materiality and the force of nature, it needs to be freed from that the binary sets of oppositions within which it has been defined, and nature itself become the object of study. In taking nature as an object of study, the exploration pursues a transdiscursive approach. In doing so, out of necessity and desire, we intersect with other discourses, be it scientific, philosophical, or historical. As nature engages itself as a free radical from the ideological constraints of architecture to become itself the object of study, as I just said, science becomes essential. And the one common mechanism to the production of knowledge in both science and architecture is representation. At the core of this work is a question of representation based on scientific studies in various domains, from the environmental sciences to the history of science and philosophy. The readings of nature to manifest and sometimes reveal the entanglements as the materiality, forces, and modes of generation overlap and affect each other. Quoting historian of science and physicist Peter Gaddison, can the visual function there too as a form of research, not just popularization or illustration? Can there be a different kind of knowledge, an epistemological contribution that supplements and enriches our understanding of science in practice? Well, I totally agree with that. A common ground between, so here we have some images of very early scientific drawings. It would be true to nature as per the different stages of science and representation. The papaya tree and corals from the 1750s to 1801. Certainly Humboldt, we all know that. A common ground between architecture and science in the understanding of nature is a central role of representation as a tentacular domain of knowledge, quoting Donna Haraway. The question of how representations of nature act as tools in scientific discoveries, from early drawing based on direct observation of nature to specialized drawing to mechanical tools such as photography to current sophisticated techniques and methods of observation and recording, diverse techniques manifest a constant presence and importance, of visual representation in the evolution of science. These are the early cyanotypes of algae and other type of vegetable flowers here, and the Brownian molecular movement location. The relation between art and science has influenced the development of scientific knowledge as it relates to a study of natural phenomena, opening the question of the role of representation in nature itself as object of study in the field of architecture. And this Saturn as per the Cassini telescope. Knowledge can be produced by seeing with different eyes, not just by talking or writing, not by photographing disaster, not by enacting what amount of temporary solutions to counteract our own destructive impulse, but rather by discovering the always mutating conditions of natural systems themselves. Historically defined by dialectically bridging the opposition between art and science, stabilizing the oscillating relationship between those terms in the scientific representation of nature, architecture is both art and science, and as such, it is in a privileged position to undertake this reading of nature with the means of production and representation of the architect. Oops. In our work as architects, no longer is Galileo drawing the craters of the moon as he observed them through a telescope as chiaroscuro in 1609, as indexing as he could afford in the transition from the visual to the manual. There are many more degrees of separation now. Rather than looking for immediate answers, as I said earlier, architecture nature is an attempt to search for and ask what the right questions might be. In that spirit, we make a parenthesis, stepping aside for a moment to take inventory and expand our knowledge and disciplinary boundaries, understanding the earth as a living organism, and its forces and complex material interactions before and after human intervention. A perspective is not about the taming of nature, but about getting to know its untamable dimensions. The work of discovery, and I'm starting with a project here, liquid tectonics, start with the observation of extreme natural phenomena through drawing and modeling that, informed by the eye of the architect, reveal a different reality. And all this work is about the underground water systems under the Yellowstone caldera, which dates about 60 million years ago, and actually more if you count more, and that it's a whole system going to the magma chambers and going up through, you're going to see in a minute, to, hold on a second, I lost that, to manifest itself in these in these explosions. They're not quite geysers, but kind of. So this is going through the lava heating the permeable and impermeable rock, and then compressing this heat that gets into the chamber as water can filter through and coming out as steam. I love this drawing. I think there you can see the power of drawing actually. And in this case, you can see this, which is, miles below the Earth's surface, and which is a different water system from steam, from flowing water, from underground rivers in this axonometric view at the thickness of the mantle, Earth's mantle. All these drawings are done to scale, every one of them. And this is a model of these geyser type things, which it was very funny how it was built. And I don't know how this person didn't burn himself, but I love this, the outcome. And actually, from the perspective, nature presents here a very different concept of time, from universal and cosmic time to Earth's geologic time, the history of Earth itself, where changes are measured in millions and hundreds of millions of years, and in which 10,000 years just a recent occurrence, helps us put in perspective the work we do and the essence supported in the time when actions are judged by the speed with which a result is obtained. Space is usually vast in the context of place that took billions or millions of years to develop, and thousands of transformations to be perceptible until the most recent history where process transformations have accelerated. As time is inseparable from space-time, is of a cosmic dimension that relates to the universe, taking architectural discourse by implication to a scale that transcends the more established disciplinary boundaries of architecture. And here we see time in action in this Seguam Island, and the production generation from the lava chambers through these tubes onto the creation of this volcanic formation in Alaska. In this project, which is Mount St. Helens, and looking into eruptions, we see here the sound effect on the right, on the upper right, the effect of the sound on the globe, which is enormous, and the melting glaciers, which are on top of the Mount St. Helens. And here's the drawing that measures and looks into the process of the eruption itself. And this is the effect of the eruption, both in light, in sound, and actually in distance. And this is speculation on the relationship between the ice and magma. If you were hypothetically to allow ice to get all the way directly and touch the magma, you would have a megaton, super megaton explosion. And so this is what this drawing is trying to portray. In the tradition of architecture, looking into, visionary utopian possibilities. This project for oblique tectonics is at Kilauea volcano, one of the youngest volcanoes in Hawaii. And this drawing is showing all the different movements that happen in the cracks that happen during, millions of years, and how the mini eruptions that happened inside all the time, and mini earthquakes happen through these fractures. And these drawings were done by hand, by the way. And this is a model of this structure that works inside the volcano. This life, death, and regeneration of the coral reefs is two stages. One is in Hawaii. In the drawing you see on the left is actually about time again. This is about the time it took for the Hawaiian archipelago to form from a hotspot through the moving plates, earth plates. As they move and overlap with this hotspot, a new volcano is generated. And on the right, you see an exploit axonometric of the reef. And these are based on data, drawings that have to do with heat and with currents in the water, essential for for coral to survive. And that's what actually is having problem, particularly the heat aspect besides acidity. And here is a handmade model and drawing of a little coral. And in this drawing is in the change of temperature in as a section in the Pacific next to the coral reef, as the change in temperature in water is affecting the survival of corals. And in this case, now going to the Marshall Islands, it's the same process of tracing the creation of Marshall Islands, and then the possibility of accelerating the creation and procreation of coral and the coral reefs to make up for the terrible decimation that we all are aware of in this. It's using the currents, the very same currents through, I never allow things to be built, but these very, very thin wires that take the heat and energy from the water. This is, we go to a different thing. This is the invisible clouds, nuclear explosions. And these are the testing through the, hundreds of nuclear testings that have happened in this country and territories. This was in the Marshall Islands, everybody's aware, and this is one of the atolls. And actually this is a cactus explosion, cactus bomb that creates this enormous crater, and that's a plume. And on the right is a topography of the debris, radioactive debris, that then traveled throughout the world. And in this case is an accumulation of these explosions in there that have decimated, the one island that was a target and destroyed the life there. And of course, it's never going to be there again until we don't know when. They say 250 years, but I don't believe it. And here's what travels around the world with the radioactive concentration in the gray area and the different trajectories in the yellow. In trace of choreography of, I can't even read there and I can't remember it, of fractures, that's the name. This is a gigantic cave in New Mexico, Lechuguillas, and this goes back 200 million years. And basically, it is really discovering and looking into how the fractures over those hundreds of millions of years have allowed water and other matters to percolate and erode very, very slowly through the surface, perpendicular, these fractures perpendicular to the range there, and create little by little. Here's this drawing going from the different levels of these fractures as this material percolates through and penetrates on this mountain range and creates these are the called chandelier rooms, which are parts of the cave in detail, which show how through these different cavities, all this material percolates through, eroding and creating. This is like 70, the range is 120 something miles long, and this about 70 miles long. It's gigantic. This is between two waters, disaster's opportunity, and it looks into the sinkholes in the southern Florida, which very soon is going to be nothing but water. There are not going to be sinkholes anymore. And that's the assumption here through these sections, which are actual conditions of the erosion as the water percolates again there and erodes the land, and these sinkholes are formed. And this is a study, a model of many of the process of erosion. And this is speculation of how every time we get a sinkhole, and there's actually caves underneath, right? A system underneath. But this system underneath is fragile. And so if the land disappears, it will all disappear with it. So the assumption here is that if you were to cast these caves, you could actually create these islands, inhabitable islands. So it's a speculation on the assumption that it will all go, and can you do anything with the traces of this incredible, gigantic transformation? In this project is growth in anoxic conditions, is exploring mangroves. And here we see the mangroves again, we're in southern Florida, and we see the plan of the mangroves above and below Earth. And this is the system of reproduction and the system of getting air down to the roots below through the cells killing themselves to allow for air to penetrate down. And in these models and photographs, you see the mangrove is a red mangrove with its apparent roots above and the actual roots below. And here we see on the right, the way the spores travel outside for reproduction. This is about the black mangrove, which is a different kind. In this case, you have these elements that grow above, above ground level as the roots, as they transmit through their ends, the oxygen to below. And here we have a composite, collage of how the system works. Here we're looking at salt domes. These section of the salt domes themselves are about 15 kilometers high. And they are actually under land. These are in the Gulf, under land and underwater. This drawing actually shows the form they take under land and underwater, different formations. And then this project actually managed to look into it and create sections from the data. These were not drawings that exist. These are all of these drawings are done from data, from numbers, from little diagrams. They're not drawings that exist. They are, I would say, presentations, or what I call representation as production. They are not copying anything. They are really constructions. And so these would be as sections. And here are the plans at different levels of these salt domes, which are extraordinary structures. This is a model, and this was done through layers, building up through layers of those plans, and then covered. And then this is done with 3D printing. And here we go in Aeolian sense. It's the power of wind. And these are the great sand dunes in Colorado. And this one of my favorite drawings. It's a beautiful, beautiful mylar drawing. And actually it shows the creation of these dunes as the lake here on the left dries, and the grains fly all the way and stop in the Rocky Mountains. So you have here a combination of the Rocky Mountains fallouts and the grains moving in the other direction and creating these sandals, which are gigantic, and they move. They move every year as a mass, and they don't disintegrate because there's still humidity underneath. It's a fascinating phenomenon. And here's the one grain on the upper left, and then there's one dune seeing the forces, conflicting forces with winds and the different composition on the bottom right, and the accumulation of movement of these dunes on top. And these are a probing of how you do if you were to probe with elements on the dunes and the force of the winds. Would there be any transformation? Here is impact and flow. It's actually a tsunami, Lituya Bay tsunami, which happened in 1958. And here's it took 7 minutes. And it's not a regular tsunami, it's a tsunami that went from land to water. And a huge rock, bigger than the Empire State Building, it says, fell down onto this water basin and displaced the water all the way to the ocean and submerged the whole thing. It all happened in 7 minutes, and these are taken at different intervals. Here continue, and this is the water. These information is down with data, actually. It's actual data. These drawings do not exist, none of them. These taken at different, there are many more. I just chose. These are 6, and these the water configuration with the data of where it was, and then there are other drawings that are not, I'm not showing, which is the topography of the water. And these an overlap, which is the cover of my book, that's what I chose, of all the different ones in time put together. And here's one of the many sections of how the water splashes as it goes down and then races. And here we have a glacier, poor glaciers. And these Columbia and Hubbard and Columbia glaciers in Alaska. And this is section, this is a very, very long glacier, and showing the different levels of composition of this glacier all the way to its end in the water. And here it is, a detail of its glacier endpoint as it's falling into the ocean. And it's all, again, although glaciers are very well studied. And here we have the different substrata of the glacier from the very bottom to the one where the snow sediments and the cracks allow more water to filter through, to the cracks opening more, because every time the cracks open, then there's contraction and expansion constantly. And so you get the bigger cracks on the top that are the ones that fall, in the end, fall to the water first. And here's a section and plan, which it's amazing. They look almost the same. And this is the Bering Strait, manipulate life cycles. And here you see the transformation of Bering Strait from winter to summer. The important thing about this project is that when the water, when it's frozen, there's no navigation through it. But when it thaws, there's a lot of navigation through, and therefore life, sea life is endangered. And so this project explores those questions, and this, the Bering Strait and permafrost in winter, and this in summer. And underneath, there's a speculation on Inuit people weaving to stop the ships from traveling through. And this permafrost landscape, which looks at permafrost a very different way. On the left is the progressive dissolution of it. And here's the whole understanding of what the cracks mean, famous cracks. And this is a view, axonometric view from below in the depth, which is very big. And here's the actual structure. It's an ice structure that builds every year, and it grows. actually, and it transforms from season to season, as we all know, when the lakes get formed. This is about subduction and the transformation of the, of the mantle rock. And here's this actually the ocean plate, the Pacific plate, with penetrating under the continental plate, which has been happening for, millions of years. And it progresses a few centimeters every year, a subduction. And there you have the point where it intersects, water leaks through. And in that leaking through, as it hits the heat below, you get the volcanic eruption. And these are drawings of the material as the stone starts to melt as you go deeper and deeper. And the forces are compressing and really affecting the entire physical formation, material and physical formation of the substrata. And here's more at the very bottom. And this is about the rock, ice, and water. And it has to do with, It has to do with the interactions between water, fire. And this is, again, that you see the ocean, you see the plates implied, and you see the magma coming through. And this is another view to see the dimension of these things. The scale is gigantic for us. It's nothing, but in the, in a different, universals of the universe scale. And these are different sections where this happens, and you can see the process and how these chambers where the water is heated and it accumulates after eruptions, and the different levels where the process happens. And this is a model that is portraying the configuration of a geyser through plastic types. Oh, I left the text there. Okay, that's fine. That helps. And the other one's a model of the process I just described. And we also do organic stuff, not just stone or fire. And these are algae, and these are very few drawings of the enormous study of every kind of algae you could think about. And here are the location of different algae groups and their composition. Here are, this is the way algae actually, I call it myself jokingly, no roots, no leaves, no, it's like, it looks like it has leaves, but they're not actual leaves. It looks like it has roots, but they're not actual roots. Algae have these gooey stuff that they produce, which is extraordinarily strong, and with which they attach to rock or other formations. And here's a detail of this and the forces at play. And this is a conceptualization of the process of reproduction as the spores travel in the water. And this is a study on the mini algae that are actually luminescent and that have an extraordinary potential for generating sea life. And this is the way they travel in the water on the right. And if we go another organic here, we're in the land of sequoia. And the sequoia has a fantastic, fantastic system whereby it needs to use the fog from the ocean at night for its nutrition. And actually it has the needles of the sequoias. This produce called Sequoia asgestalt. And it is through its needles that these fog penetrates and creates the means of subsistence in going through the roots and to the land. And on the right is the way it procreates itself. It goes in triangular shapes. They fall and they reproduce in a triangulated form, which is quite extraordinary. And so as a sequoia, after 450 years, is the oldest, I think, tree in the world. And also it could last like 450 years. And so when it finally dies and it falls, it starts, growing. All its nutrients go from the trunk all the way to the soil in order to generate a new sequoia. And here we're at the end, and we're here on tornado land, and it's called tornado genesis and topography. And so this is on top, you can see the forces, the area where there are most tornadoes on the red area. And as we all know, it has to do with the collision of the cold winds from the north and the southern humid winds from the south. And so this is a construction of looking through the wind pattern and configuration through computer in plan and in section. And I thought it was too complicated. So I suggested to use your hand and see how the winds and the gesture of the body. And so I don't know if you see me there at all, actually. Well, I'm moving my hands and all of that. And, but here is a different, the generation of tornado as it starts from one end, and then you get the conflicting winds from the other end. And it grows and grows and grows. And then it becomes this gigantic thing that nobody can stop, as manifested in this. And here you see the possibility, here's topography, and the speculation that you could actually kind of control, stop the power of tornadoes through topographic manipulation at a gigantic scale. But we are always trying to speculate, not to construct, not to build, not to do any of those mega structures, but just to speculate on the potentialities of these natural phenomena that we discover through looking at them as themselves. So they're not solutions, they're pure speculations. And here's a speculation of the big tunnels that could maybe stop tornadoes. And I want to end by saying that we should accept that we humans are but one species of living organism and not necessarily the central one. The accelerating scale of human intervention is now unprecedented, but it's not just about us. At the core of this reading of nature is a complex weaving of so many time frames and scales. Everything is moving all the time. The line is never still, an endless choreography of bodies in space, time. A multidimensional opera in a total theater where the stage moves and changes as the drama unfolds through events that articulate different rhythms, times, and tempos while defining spaces as the traces that overlap and intersect. These presentations of nature are revealed by our expanded perspective. And then, as a corollary to this work, there is our human time, our mini choreographies of reproduction and survival over a narrative of run for your life. We're trying here to establish a bridge between those two worlds. Thank you.
Thank you, Diana.
Okay.
The grand tour, fantastic. Thank you. So let me check in with well, I'm going to hand over to Keith first. Keith, are you ready to?
I'm here. I may not be ready, but I'm definitely here.
Yeah.
I'm in no rush. Are there people behind those names?
Yeah.
Yes, there are.
Turn your faces on, folks.
Yeah, plenty of bodies.
So nice faces to see who's there.
So Diana, I just want
to so much nature. Our own little nature.
I wanted to give Keith a few moments to have a conversation with you, and then we'll open it up to the audience for general questions.
Sure.
So, well, firstly, of course, thank you for a really spectacular, rousing, and thought-provoking talk. Aside from all the technical difficulties, yes, the technology always presents us with many, many snafus. Before I start to ask, I guess, some of the questions that are swirling around my head, we should ask the students or the participants to maybe type in their names or kind of summaries of their questions so that we can organize that in some coherent manner, rather than just kind of like randomly selecting from the order. I mean, there's just like, there's such a rich, complex and intriguing set of topics and ideas that you presented. So during the lecture, the entire time I was like furiously scribbling notes, trying to in some way interpolate, summarize, and it's the complexity of both the enormity of the kind of the work that you're presenting here makes it a little challenging to kind of formulate that into some cogent questions. I mean, I'll try to like boil it down to what's kind of most pertinent in my kind of reading of the work or understanding of the work, and start simply with like maybe the whys and the whats. You alluded to it a little bit in the start of your presentation, but really just the origin of the project and the pedagogical nature of it. And it wasn't something that you explicitly talked about, right? As educators, syllabi kind of always arise out of a cultural institution and disciplinary milieu, right? In which we are starting to understand some perceived urgency of the circumstances or conditions that happen to be affecting the environment in which the education is formed. And given the kind of subject matter and methodology of the work, I mean, the one thing that's obvious, and I think maybe I missed that you didn't express it directly, is like the total absence of the architectural figure altogether, right, in everything. It's there as a kind of ghost, what you might see as the marking of measure, and how we start to understand the rather diffuse systems of the environment and start to regulate it into orders through systems of measurement, vis-a-vis science and other modes of interpolation. But I wonder if you could just reflect a little bit on how these explorations and endeavors were really set out to challenge, modify, address the architectural student and their education and the shaping of the architectural imagination. Because it's a kind of wholly set of different kind of topical ideas that you're taking on here. And that's kind of a maybe broad, but very specific. And maybe also within the legacy of Cooper, right? And its endeavors of experimentation and exploration.
Well, I think that, first of all my life, which is most of my other life teaching, I've always developed pedagogical ways that have to do with the way I've always done critical work. I've done this for years, I still do on the city. You know, and then you'll see projects that you maybe haven't seen in other places, so I don't know. But it has to do with looking at, first of all, the important thing here was to get architecture out of the picture. And I said that in the very beginning. You know, you have to, in order to explore, the question I would say, and I'm just trying to look at myself retrospectively because I'm not sure that I exactly know. I know that when I did that China Basin project, it was a really provocative, for most people didn't like it. I don't know if they like it now, but a number of them were very influenced by it, that I do know. But not in the right way, actually, which is, it wasn't about form, it was about the whole concept, you know. But anyway, it's like I can't help but think critically, you know, that's, I have a gene there somewhere. Mm-hmm. So, but I thought that in a certain way, people were talking about not nature, but all this sustainability thing. And it became a racket, you know, I just hate that. And so in a certain way, I say people talk and talk, and I can change the light bulb like everybody else, you know, and open my window and all those things that are 101 of normal living. But basically, I thought, but nobody knows what it is. People talk sustainability because use a composite for a beam, give me a break. I mean, that's like, or you open the window, the cross ventilations that, you know, or things like that. I mean, it's like, is that it? You know, is that all there is? Like the song goes, is that all there is? And so I thought that I had to look, what I said in the beginning when in my introduction, that nature has always been attached to either culture, then in our field, the city, architecture always goes, and therefore it's within that system. And I call it my theory book, it's called Architecture and Without. You know, I always do that because I think you have to open from the system that we're brought in those inherited ideologies to this day in order to think about it a little bit more freshly or something like that. And so I came to the conclusion that the only way to do that is to think of nature itself as the object of study. Not nature and architecture, not landscape, not planning, nothing. All things I love, doesn't matter. I love landscape, everybody else, and I love architecture, I love the city. That has nothing to do with it. If you want to know what are we talking about, we need to talk about nature. And I said, that's where I said first to me is the earth. I'm not the only one, certainly. It is for a number of people, you know, very respectable people. And you have to get in a modest way, because this is what is this, you know, it's a little, you know, probing. And so I thought of doing extreme natural phenomena, because I thought that then you could see the effects of natural forces. You see the extreme, in everything is combined and everything. So originally I started doing, which had the effect, mostly the effect was from fire, what the effect was from water, what was the effect from, you know, earth itself or geology. So I started seeing all of these basic forces that make the earth. And then I said, no, well, forget about that, you know, that kind of more traditional classification, because nothing is quite like that. And everything's overlapping all the time. And so, but I still like the idea of extreme because, you know, also I think when you study anything, you know, it's like you could see that in medicine, you could see that in psychology, you could see that in everything. To learn the medium, you need to go to the extreme, understand the extremes, you know. And so I said, we have to do extreme to see what's going on. And so that was one of my premises. The other one was that we're going to do the US and territories, because obviously it comes, you know, so it goes all over the place. And we have plenty here to, it's not about nationalism, it's just very practical point of view. And we have plenty of conditions that we could explore. And so that was it. And so as I said, these are nothing to hold on to because they knew there was no, you know, and then drawing. So the moment, and was when you mentioned Cooper, and so I remember, it was a very weird moment. And for some reason, people are not caring so much. If anybody from Cooper is listening to me, they're going to want to strangle me, but I risk it. But at that time, this a number of years ago, for some reason that I don't know what it is, or I don't care really to speculate on it, people in studios were not caring so much about drawing. They were drawing okay, but it wasn't like, how am I drawing? What am I drawing? Why am I drawing this way? Drawing is a tool for thought. If you draw any whichever way, who cares? You know, you have to, a beautiful drawing is a drawing, as I think Richard generously mentioned, the beauty is not because they're beautiful as objects aesthetically, it's because there's a concept there and you have to figure out how you draw it. These drawings, they all have to, you don't know the piles of drawing that are behind each one of them. The pile of research that's behind. If you look at the end of my book, you see the appendix. And I limited to 10 the references because some had many more, you know, of studying and looking and so on. None of them have these drawings, none of them.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, so the question in a certain way was, and so I remember the first time I did it, I did in the undergraduate program, although most of these I said before were done in the graduate studio. But the first time I did it was in the undergrad, 4th year. And I said, okay, you cannot do this type of drawing. I'm not going to give the detail for this and this reason. It's too slow. No way. You can't do this type of drawing because of whatever. You can do it at home for yourself if you want. You can't do it. So you can do pencil on vellum because that's the worst. I call it the bitch because that's like the hardest thing ever. I had only one student in my entire life that made the most beautiful pencil on vellum drawing. You know, impossible. So there was very little left. And then I talked to them. Of course, they could do ink on mylar if they wanted. Then they have to know what a line means. But so I talk about the computer. This at the time when people still thought that Haydo was still thinking against the computer. That had been, you know, that's old. That was like another time. So I explained to them, computer is a tool. And the computer will do what you tell it to do. And so, they just flew with it. That's what happened. They just went with it. And every time happens the same. They get so inspired. The person who worked on the tsunami, and he must have done 3 versions of that and said, no, that's computer, that's pictorial, that's this, that's that, no, you know, and he got it. Yeah, so there's a lot of work there, you know.
Yeah. So in a lot of what you're expressing and kind of emphasizing, and it finds its way throughout your lecture and your book and the interviews, is that, wow, you don't necessarily at times talk about it expressly and explicitly, but the role of mediation in understanding this kind of extreme natural phenomena, right? In the fact that in choosing something that is an extreme natural phenomena, and as Richard kind of brought up, you know, we could think of that as similar or likened to Tim Morton's hyperobjects, right? And these are forms of phenomena that are so massive and so distributed they can't be experienced directly. And so you need some form of advanced instrumentation to be able to even begin to describe them in impartial. And I was reflecting on that, and I was thinking, you know, what sprung to mind is the ozone hole. And I bring up the ozone hole because you refer to James Lovelock's Gaia hypothesis earlier on.
In my book, yeah.
In your book, and it's funny that Lovelock was also the inventor of the electron capture detector. Maybe about 20 years earlier to that hypothesis, and that device was absolutely instrumental for scientists to find the ozone hole in the first place. And so it's interesting that the kind of fraught nature of the terminology, and I know you're doing this very precisely and explicitly, but the terminology of nature kind of interchangeably with environment and landscape, where the latter two we understand as particular mediated cultural forms of the outside world, and that those instruments of mediation play a role in shaping our understanding of that phenomena. But you still hold on to the term nature itself, which I believe, or I think you do it to purposefully kind of uncouple or dislodge these, let's say, binaries or oppositions that may have been held out through legacies of architectural convention, right? So it seems very, and that's just kind of in my my previous question, that it's specifically geared in some way to the disciplinary history of architecture and the theories of architecture, which is, I think, really interesting. I'm not sure if there's a question there, but just kind of a reflection on that.
I mean, you're saying such interesting things. I think that I remember going through a struggle with this. First of all, when I named this nature, you know, that was my studios now, architecture of nature, nature of architecture. And I just didn't give it, you know, a second thought, but I knew what I meant. And the truth is that people that work in science or work in this, they also use the word nature. You would see that word used, you know, so in a certain way, and it's funny that I remember the first time I read Lovelock, which must have been at the time after I did my China Basin project. And I was exploring all these different things about nature. And I remember it was in some book, you know, with different really interesting articles on nature. And it was something about nature. You couldn't find many books that talked about nature like that. And I said, well, I have to go to philosophy or science, the only way. These are the two disciplines that have always, their object of study have been nature, you know? And so, but I'm not a scientist, you know?
Yeah.
But, you know, we try our best. So yes, the nature has that element of connecting. You can connect or disconnect. So the reason I had told Richard that it's not landscape is because I wanted to keep this dimension of space-time and this disengagement alive. I didn't want it subsumed into, as architecture too, you know, into our own system. I wanted to be able to breathe and acquire life that could be explored. And what in your previous question was the question of the tools. And yes, drawing is what is essential. And that's what's continuing my thing about drawing. And so I said, drawing is the important thing. That's how we think in architecture. So what we're going to keep is our eyes as architects and our tools, you know, and that will give you a different view. It's not going to be the view of a geologist. It's not going to be the view of somebody working in ecology, going to be a geographer, you know, or any of those people that really devote their lives to these issues. But they see differently. Yeah. They see numbers in formulas, in little diagrams, which I love, but they're not these. So I think we made some few little discoveries. You don't even find them anywhere. Yeah.
Well, I think that's a good segue of the act of translating or reading forms of describing extreme natural phenomena that are non-spatial visual in the sense of it being geographic or cartographic. I'm going to turn now to the chat room, and Erica has a really intriguing question. Erica, would you like to phrase it in your own terms?
Keith, we were going to skip ahead to Ian's question.
Oh no, we're going to skip ahead to Ian's question. So we're going to Ian's question. So maybe it's not a good segue, but Ian, are you still there? Where are you?
There's an Ian there, but
yeah, we see an Ian.
Hello.
Hi.
I'm gonna turn my camera on. There's a lot of us here in the room.
Wow. Okay, good.
I'm curious if you can say a bit more about the kind of tension between capturing these like ecological or geological processes as through representation and kind of freezing them in time as opposed to their kind of understanding them as inherently ephemeral processes as opposed to kind of objects that they turn into in the drawings.
How is the question?
If you can just talk more about like how you think about if through representation it transforms the processes that you're exploring into kind of objects as opposed to like elements of a larger system.
That's the problem. That's the problem with anything you do, right? It always becomes an object. That's the thing. And I think we didn't know what the objects were going to be, you know, frankly, these drawings. There wasn't a formula at all. And yeah, there's a danger, but that's how you learn, you know. You learn what to do and you learn what to not to do. And, you know, it's still there. So it's a witness to something. And it's a referent. How do you study? I say all my history of architecture through books with images that, and you have to do and look at the drawings and look at the photographs, look at this and look at that to understand. Because who can travel to every building you have to study? Certainly I didn't. Some I don't want to go ever because I don't want to be disappointed and I love them. It can happen too. But yes, you have a point there, but c'est la vie, you know, that's the life of what we do and what everybody does, you know. And hopefully they might serve some kind of educational function or just pleasure because they're beautiful. And if you want to read, you're going to read what they're about and learn something. Maybe it makes you want to go there even, you know. So it's a good question, but that's, I wish we could have done, well, these are very few drawings of each bird, by the way, of these drawings, not the ones that were the entire process of research all the time. These are just a very tiny selection because I can't until, you know, today I kept on, you know, delete. There are lots of tryouts, and every time you try something, becomes that temporary object or permanent object in somebody's file. Maybe it's a part of an archive, who knows? And then you learn something and then you have to move on. And if you don't do the first, you don't get to the second. So the important thing to me is what you do before you get to the object. That would be my answer, that the process that you go through in generating this and creating this, that's what I call as production, creating these drawings, these readings of nature, that's, to me, you know, and I think everybody went through it, is not more important than the actual finished object, which, you know, we're fetishists and we love to look at our drawings. I always tell my students, if you don't spend as much time looking at your drawings you spend doing it, it's not a good drawing, you know, because you always have that narcissistic, fetishistic thing that, oh, you have to look at your drawing and this and that and so on, you know. So, but that's also good, you know, that's also good. But there's a process to get there, and the process was about your own development, you know, of acquiring knowledge, but also you have to think of it about a modest way of production of knowledge. I really call it modest. I don't want to play a game here. I really mean it. Very modest, you know, a little something.
Diana, we have another question that builds on this idea of drawing from Daniel. Daniel, do you want to introduce it? Would you like me to read your question, or do you want to introduce it, Daniel?
He's muted.
Yeah, I just cut out for a bit. Yeah, sure.
Daniel, two Daniels.
Hi, yeah, thanks for coming. And that was an incredible presentation. And I do want to go to so many of those places, certainly Hawaii right about now. But I heard you say several times that some of the images that these drawings don't exist. And I really thought that was interesting, and I wanted you to kind of explain further on that, and then maybe how do you then define what a drawing is if those drawings don't exist, or if a drawing doesn't exist, does that make it a drawing?
No, that's not what I meant. No, I'm sorry. I maybe didn't express myself clearly. They don't exist out there. It's not. They're not copies of a drawing. These drawings have been produced from data. That's what I mean. They're like, I remember talking with Peter Gaddison a lot about this, you know, because his work on science and representation, which is something I came about after I started doing this for years. And I was so thrilled, and he loved the work. And he said, but these are not representations. These are, he calls them presentations. Presentation. I call it drawing as production, which means kind of the same, which is not that you're copying something that's already out there and you embellish it or you give it an interpretation. No, they're real constructions. I mean, they're like, that's what I meant. They don't exist. Not that they exist themselves. Yes, they very much so. But that's exactly what I meant. Thank you for the question, because it's good to clarify that. No, that's what, and it's a very important thing. Right. It's not representation in a traditional way. And, you know, representation is a fantastic subject. And of course, I've written and explored the question of representation for always in different ways. I realized one day, hey, but I've been writing about representation all the time. I didn't even realize it's such an important thing. We live in a world where everything's representation, mostly. So you better know what we're, you know, what we're doing. So yeah, these are really constructions, you know. So that's what I meant.
To build on that idea that Daniel's presented, can you talk a little bit about how semiotics works in your drawings?
Well, it's somewhere in the back of my mind, and I don't know. I don't use it. I might use concepts or sometimes some terminology like shifter, but because I love it and I discovered it when I was still a student, and I've been using it ever since. But it's very productive the way I think about it. It's very important for me in my urban theory. But I don't think maybe I have a semiotic mind that I see things, you know. I can see stuff, I can read drawings or whatever, but I'm not doing it as an exercise in semiotics by any means at all. It's you know, we don't always do the same, you know, just I don't denying my interest or knowledge for so many years and everything I've written, but when I use semiotics, it was truly a conceptual tool for what I wanted to do with my critical work. I didn't want to find semiotics and say, oh, how can I apply these at a Jenks, you know? Oh, form, you know, signified. Oh, let's replace for form function. And then you got the same again. So that's not the way my mind works. So if you search, you have a question, which I did, still being a student, and you want to explore how to think about it. And, you know, you explore and you find tools, or you're lucky, you fall into this, and then that takes you to that, and so on. And you construct your own concepts. And, you know, I started by, you know, somehow or other finding or being fortuitously in some seminar by chance, and, you know, on something that made me immediately think. And then I used it. But if I didn't have a question, I didn't have anything something that I wanted to work on critically, what was the point? It would have been an academic exercise. That was not what I was up to. So, and I could say that I've never betrayed that, you know. It doesn't mean, but now I work with other concepts that I studied. I've been so happy having to study all this stuff, you know. It's not so easy.
Yeah. Oh, we have I just saw that Erica entered a new question into the chat here. Erica? Thanks, Felicia.
Hi.
Erica?
Hi, thank you for speaking. It's been a wonderful presentation. You know, in hearing your response to what Daniel asked about what you're calling presentations or constructions that are drawings in themselves, I was thinking about, you know, the data that you are basing your presentation on. The fact that data is produced by an instrument that is sensing things that humans cannot sense, and therefore you know, you can say that it doesn't exist in that sense. Like I was interested in what your thinking was about, you know, extra human sensing and data production, and how does your construction of a drawing relate to that?
Well, you know, when you want to produce something, you need raw material, right? That's the basic concept of production. You have raw material, you have tools, you process, and you get something, right? I always apply that to work, to theoretical work. That's how I think about it. And so you're going to have concepts from philosophy or from whatever you're working. And then you have your conceptual tools. You have the question, the raw material to work, you have your concepts, and then you elaborate. And so I would say that a lot of these data or different information could be text from philosophy as well, you know, or history or whatever. It's a raw material. That's what you work with. You know, we don't go, I don't think I talked about that today, but, you know, we don't go like directly to nature like used to do in the 18th century or 19th century, you know. You walk to nature, record this, record that, or even now, the people the scientists that do the testing. But then I remember bringing this up. It's a good question. So I remember bringing this up to Caroline Jones, who's interviewed, I had the interview, I interviewed both Caroline Jones and Peter Gallison because they have very different, they had some things that work together, but they see things differently. It's it's fantastic. And so I said, you know, I want to ask you this because we don't go directly, we don't draw from the actual stuff. We base on text, on documents, on these of all kinds and so on. Said, well, who doesn't? Everyone does that. Scientists do that. And said, what do you think scientists do? They work on the work that's done before by other scientists, right? So then you select. I always say you make your own brainwashing, right? When you choose, you curate your own choices basing on what makes you tick, what clicks with you, what background you have, how it connects with other concepts you're working with. And then, or you think those have merit, or you trust the sources in some way. We all curate ourselves all the time. You know, what you read and what you don't read. And what philosopher you think is personal, right? I mean, what relates to you or to your values or what you're thinking at that moment or whatever it is, and what you don't. And so I think that's what I think went on in producing these drawings. And where are they going to get information? If you climb Mount Everest, you can't make the drawing of Mount Everest like this. You'd have a fabulous experience. You don't kill yourself, but you might make some sketches or beautiful drawings of a very different kind. So, you know, that's where the tools are important. How you see, how you select your tools, and your tools are also the conceptual tools. And there's where you have to see, you know, I've looked at many of these books that we were working on more specific. At night, I was researching each one of these projects, material. You know, I verified every one of those sources, every one of them, to make sure that were legit, that they came from sources that are reputable in terms of whatever it is that it was about, et cetera, et cetera. And then what you get from them, because they're not easy to read. I mean, you're gonna get, you know, a 50-page thing and then you're gonna use 2 pages, you know. That's the way these things work, right? That's reality, you know, because we cannot become all experts on everything unless you're Diderot, you know, but if you're not Diderot, you can't become an expert in everything. So, you know, that's the way, I don't know if that answers your question.
So Richard wants to put a bow on this all. He's interested in the quote unquote next chapter. Sorry if I revealed the big surprise, but I think there's more to that question than just that point.
This is a closing question now, and we're moving to a conversation. with Steve and Linda.
Okay.
And my question is, now that you've published the book, which is, you know, a book is it's a sort of an end point, I suppose, of a whole lot of work. And as I wrote in the chat, you've managed to capture a contemporary sublime. So what do you do now? What's your next?
And that's what I like. That's the oh God, Graham Burnett thing with the sublime there in the interview. I love Graham Burnett. He's wild, and he himself is interdiscursive. You know, he's an artist also, and a writer, and a historian of science. So perfect. And anyway, he could bring the sublime, and he brought Humboldt and all that, which humbled me. But well, I've been working on the body.
I was going to say, that was going to be my next point, that you would try to draw a connection between the body and the earth.
Not necessarily will take care of itself, you know.
Yep.
This happens. So I've done it twice. It's a very difficult project. Again, nothing to hold on to because it's the body.
Right.
No? There is body. I also wrote, one of my first things was about the body, architecture from without. And
so the students are using the same techniques and mining medical texts and so on to source the data?
They can look, no, because they can look from different perspectives. You don't have to do medical necessarily. I mean, they're very different. Each one have done very different things. And I'm doing it now again. We'll see through Zoom. It's not easy, but it's fascinating. And how many ways you can, what different people, they have their own narratives, you know, how to see the question of the body, you know.
Sure.
So we'll see what happens. I'm working on a book now with Mario, my partner, and which is a kind of reading of our own work, both theoretical and mostly urban, which is tons of stuff and stuff we haven't published, not because they're not publishable, but because whatever, you know, you do what you do. And so that's a book in progress and not easy, so we'll see.
Okay, great. Well, thank you. Thank you, everyone. It was a beautiful lecture. Really good. Thank you.
Okay, great.
And
so shall I take the next link now?
do we have another link or do we just stay on this call? I'm not sure.
I got from
Liz.
There is a separate link for.
I think from Annabelle I got a different link, which is in my email. And so
Yes, I emailed it.
If I can take a couple of minutes of my, or maybe I end here.
End this and go to the next.
Yeah, you would leave the meeting.
Thank you, Deanna. Thanks,
Keith.
everyone. Have a great night.